It's great to be here. I haven't been to Oregon for a couple of years, so I love Portland. I used to live here years ago. Anybody around here from Portland area? A few people from Portland area. Very cool. Anyway, I'm going to talk about myself a little bit, why I do what I do before I go into my pro-life talk, before the social justice begins in the womb talk. I like to tell a little bit about myself, who I am, why I travel around the country or around the world and speak on pro-life, because I have not always been this fine, upstanding citizen that you see before you right now. I was actually raised in a really rough childhood with a really rough past. The first 9 months of my life were pretty negative. The first 9 months were really rough. I barely survived. In fact, my mother in 1967 tried to abort me. She tried to have an abortion. She was not successful, obviously. And when she finally told her parents that she was pregnant with me, my grandparents were so ashamed of me and my mother that they sent my mother to live in another city. Made her go live in San Francisco so none of the neighbors would know that she was pregnant, that their daughter was pregnant out of wedlock. So that was the first 9 months of my life, pretty negative as I got started. But growing up, I was in a really abusive family. It was mentally abusive, physically abusive, sexually abusive. I was passed around from parent to parent as people got married, remarried, divorced, and pretty much was the unwanted child. I was, as an infant, I had a disease called spinal meningitis, and they used to have to keep me in barrels of ice to keep my temperature down because my temperature was so high. And at one point, I was actually pronounced clinically dead. And when the doctor left the room to go tell my mother I had died, another doctor ran out and said, "Wait a minute, we've revived him." But they told my mother that I would probably be a vegetable or severely retarded for the rest of my life. And so I grew up, I rode the little yellow bus to school. I was in the Special Olympics. I was considered partially mentally retarded. By the time I was 12, though, I had been passed around from parent to parent. None of my family really wanted me. And they contacted my real dad in Los Angeles and sent me off to live with my real dad. So at that point, they put me into a regular junior high school where I went to half special ed classes and half regular classes. So all the kids in the regular junior high would see me in with the special ed, and then they'd see me in their classes in the afternoon. So I became like the most picked on kid in school. I was really skinny, real little guy, because I used to take so much Ritalin for hyperactivity. And I got beat up so bad in junior high school that the principal actually let me out of school 5 minutes before anyone else so I can get home safely. This is a pretty rough area in Los Angeles. And my parents didn't care. My stepbrothers used to help the kids in the neighborhood beat me up. And so my escape from that was to get stoned pretty much every day. I spent most of my time just completely wasted out of my mind. I could always find drugs in my dad's closet, so it was pretty easy. The kind of household I lived in, when I was 16, I ran away from home for 2 weeks, and my parents actually never knew I was gone. Never knew I was gone from the house. That's the kind of family I grew up in. There was no love for God, no religion, no morals in my household. At age 17, I was living under the Hermosa Beach Pier in Southern California, prostituting myself out for food or shelter at times. And I met an Army recruiter who wanted to help me get my life straight. And so she helped me get clean a little bit. At 18, I joined the Army. And within 6 months, I was kicked out of the Army after I tried to hang myself. At age 20, in 1987, I was back in Orange County, California, spending most of my time getting high. I was living with my girlfriend part-time and with my drug supplier the rest of the time. And my job in trade for my drugs was I was the nanny for their baby, for my drug supplier. So I spent my time wasted taking care of a baby. I had no respect for my fellow human person whatsoever, no respect at all. And one morning in 1987, I got up early to go to a Grateful Dead Bob Dylan concert at Anaheim Stadium down in California. I started the day on a few lines of crystal meth. Now, as I tell you this story, understand that I should not be alive for the amount of drugs that I ingested into my body that day, let alone have any memory whatsoever. But I have a very crystal vivid, clear memory of that day. I started the day on a few lines of crystal meth, got to the concert, smoked some pot, took about 5 or 6 jelly beans that were dipped in LSD, got in line, took a big chug, about a half a gallon of orange juice that had methadone in it, which is what they give to heroin addicts. And then during the concert, I smoked a PCP stick, ate a full handful of hallucinogenic mushrooms, and at the end of the concert, I took 2 more hits of LSD. Now, my next memory leaving the stadium, after leaving the stadium, was I was in a phone booth near the stadium screaming to the operator to get the phone out of my head because I believe the phone had melted into my head. And so that was my reality. And as the ambulance came and the fire trucks came, I thought I was being abducted by UFOs. The fireman laid me down in the ambulance, and as my head went back and everything went ghost white, I looked up and I said, am I dead? And he looks down at me and he goes, "No, you're on drugs." But the worst part is the guy, as I'm looking up, he looked just like the guy from the Planet of the Apes. So I'm seeing this ape man going, "You're on drugs." Kind of freaky. And they took me to UC Irvine Medical Center, and I was locked in a wheelchair. I had one hand, my right arm, strapped to the wheelchair locked to the wall, and I was in a room full of people that had overdosed. And a doctor walks in this room and he looks at me and he goes, "You, I need to talk to you." I'm like, "Whatever, dude, just give me a cigarette." So he goes out, he finds a cigarette, and he comes back in. And I don't know how he looked me straight in the face. I had no shoes on, pair of shorts on, a ripped up shirt. I smelled like a dumpster. I had a mohawk. I had a big safety pin shoved through my nose, and my whole mouth was completely black all the way around from the charcoal water that the nurses had been pouring down my throat. The charcoal soaks the poison and the drugs out of your body. And the whole time with my left arm, I'm eating these blueberries that were magically floating in the air. And he looked straight at me, and I'm like, whatever. So he finds me a cigarette. He takes me outside. As he's wheeling me outside, I realized what he was about to do. I realized I was about to get preached at. I hated Christians with a passion. Hated Christians. All my life I've been told, "You're evil, you're going to hell, you listen to Ozzy Osbourne, you're the devil." You know? That's what I've been told. So that was my idea of Christianity, is that God hated me, I was evil, I listened to Ozzy, so I'm going to hell. But I wanted a cigarette really bad, so I figured I'd go to church, you know. And he takes me outside, and he sits down. I'm waiting for him to start telling me how evil I am and stuff. And he looks at me, and he's like, "You know, God loves you so much. You are so valuable to God. There is hope for you in Jesus. You are worth so much more than this." And I freaked out. No one in my life had ever told me I was worth anything, or that I had any value at all. All my life I was told I was hopeless. And this man just told me that God loved me? I grew up thinking God hated me. And I got out of the hospital that next day, and my girlfriend said, what do you want to do? And I'm like, "You know, I just want to go swimming out in the ocean. I need to just clear my mind." So we went about an hour away near where we lived to Long Beach, California. And we went out in Belmont Shores in the harbor out there, and I went swimming out in the ocean. And a boat pulls up next to me. And the guy on the boat points down and says, you were at the Grateful Dead concert." Now understand, this is the next day, an hour away, in another city, out in the Pacific Ocean. Okay? It was the fireman, the ape man. And he looks at me and he says, "You know, God loves you so much. You are worth so much more than this. There is so much you're so valuable to Christ." He said almost the exact same thing that doctor had said the night before. And I kind of freaked out. I'm thinking, this is like a movie script, okay? This is not real. And I went home and I fell asleep for about 3 days. And I woke up and I started to get high again. Started to roll a joint with a marijuana joint with a line of crystal meth in it. And as soon as I lit it up, I started bawling my eyes out. I had no idea. I'm supposed to be, you know, I didn't cry. I'm this tough punk rock guy. I got a big giant safety pin shoved through my nose, right? I don't cry. Well, my wife will tell you nowadays, 5 minutes of extreme home makeover and I've lost it. But back then I was tough. I didn't cry. And I reached in my pocket and there was a phone number, and I called the number and I said, I'm on drugs. I'm going to die. Can you help me? And he says, yeah, I'm a pastor of a church. Can you come down here? So I showed up at his church. He said, I'm going to give you a place to live. I'm going to give you clothing, food, a job. We're going to get you clean. The only thing we ask is, would you give God a chance? I'm like, all right, God, whatever you can do, let's see it. I've tried everything else in my life. Let's see if you can do this. So I went and they took me to this home with a bunch of other guys living there. And then the next morning, they woke me up like before God ever wakes up at like 6 a.m. I swear, that's when I went to bed normally. So I'm like, and the worst part is they're so happy and full of joy. They're like, good morning, brother, hallelujah, and like hugging and just, oh, disgusting. Like, get away from me, you Jesus freaks. And I just hated it there. I hated it there for 3 days. I just was miserable. How can any person be filled with so much joy? I have never seen that much joy in anybody before, and it just freaked me out. And that third night, I started sweating. My body started to shake. And I laid down in bed, and I started pouring out cold sweat, and I started hallucinating. And the shadow of the tree was like eating me, and I started going through withdrawals. And they came in, and they said, we're going to pray for you, brother. And they prayed for me. And all of a sudden, the shakes stop, the sweats, the hallucinations. Everything stops. And I fell into the most beautiful sleep I'd ever had in my life. And the only way I can describe what happened next is I basically woke up one of those happy Jesus freaks. I woke up the next morning saying, tell me about Jesus. Who is this Jesus? And I sat down and I read the Gospel of John from front to back that day and fell in love with Jesus that day. And since that day in 1987, I've been clean off drugs and living my life for God. So, amen. Now, for me, it's been a long journey. It's been a long journey in this last month. I was actually, as a baby, I was baptized Catholic by my great-grandmother. She forced my dad to do it, but there was no follow-up after that. And this last month, I just returned home to the Catholic Church, so I'm also pretty excited in the rest of my journey. But for me, it's just about it's about Jesus, And I sit and I tell this story when I speak for two different reasons. The first reason is I was one of the most evil men you would have ever met in your life. I was a criminal. I committed crimes that I could be put in prison for the rest of my life. I treated people so badly. I was the kind of person that if you saw me walking down the street and you knew who I was, you would cross the street. I was considered mentally retarded. I won 3 blue ribbons at the Special Olympics. I wasted 20 years of my life. And now I travel the world. Like in the last few months, I've been to Belgium, Scotland, New Zealand, England, Ireland, Germany, Netherlands. Just speaking on pro-life, I've traveled the world. I've been in 3 documentary movies. I've written a book. I've sang on major Christian rock albums. I am married to the most gorgeous, amazing woman on the face of the earth. And we have 6 beautiful children. And but listen, none of that, not one achievement in my life is possible but by the blood of Jesus Christ. Not one achievement, not one thing that I've done is possible except through what Christ has done in my life. And so for me to come out here and speak, I'm not putting myself on a pedestal. I am first and foremost giving glory to Christ and God and what he did in my life. That's my commitment to God, is whenever I go out and speak, that I will make sure that he gets the glory for anything that I've done or am able to accomplish. That's the first reason I tell that story. But the second reason I tell that story is because I had no respect for my fellow human person. No respect whatsoever. And that's really what the abortion debate is about. It's not about the procedure of abortion. It's about the personhood of every single person from the moment of fertilization to natural death. The fact that every single human person from the moment they are created is of equal value, and no one person is greater than another person. No person has more value than another person. That's what this is about. The fact that I would sit and take care of a baby while high on drugs, I had no respect for my fellow human person. And that's what's going on in our society. That's what's going on in our society around the world, the lack of respect for personhood. It's crazy, And we can look into history and we can see the lessons that we're supposed to have learned from stripping away personhood from different people. If you look at in 1857, there was a man named Dred Scott and his wife. He had been a slave, and he was moved to a free state and then back to a slave state. And back then, our United States government said that black people were only 3/5 human, that they were only 3/5 of a human. So Dred Scott went to the Supreme Court of the United States, a place that on the thing it says equal justice under law. And he sued our government to be declared a full human person, and he lost. Our United States Supreme Court, in a 7-2 decision in 1857, upheld that black people were only 3/5 of a human being, and therefore they could be beaten, they could be traded, they could be sold, they could be killed, and it didn't matter. Their personhood was stripped away from them. Now, I used to live in a town, Fredericksburg, Virginia. Anybody been to Fredericksburg, Virginia? Oh, very cool. A few people have been there. Fredericksburg is, they consider themselves the most historical city in the country. They have the house that George Washington built for his mother, back when kids actually cared about their moms. You know, they have the Rising Sun. I know you probably care about your mom.
I do.
All right, that's good. He wants some a little bit of attention up here. No, you have the house that George Washington built for his mother. I'm sorry, I'm teasing you. You have the Rising Sun Tavern, a tavern owned by George Washington's brother. And they say that was the place where they first talked about the Declaration of Independence. There's a special tour. It's not really known, but there's a tour of toilets in Fredericksburg. And they say this is like Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson have all sat on these toilets. You know, some of the most famous toilets ever in Fredericksburg. But what's the most important part of Fredericksburg? The most important part to me is a piece of stone cemented in a sidewalk corner near a coffee house where I used to drink coffee. And this stone was sort of the mall of that time, the 1800s. You could buy a barrel of apples. You can buy a horse. You can buy a carriage. But more importantly, you can buy a human being. This was a slave trading block. And on the stone, they would walk somebody up. They would literally stand them up there, and they would auction them off like a piece of property. And this stone is not there to glorify our history. It's not there to say this was a great time in history. It's there to tell us as a society we cannot go back. We can never go back to a time when our fellow human person is treated like a piece of property. That's why that stone is there. That's why that stone is there, but we have forgotten that. We have ignored that, and we have gone back to that time. We have gone back to that time. On January 22nd of 1973, the Supreme Court of the United States of America, just like in the Dred Scott decision, in a 7-2 decision, declared that children in their mother's wombs were not full human persons. And they stripped away the personhood of your generation. And we went back. And every day since that day in 1973, almost 4,000 little baby boys and girls are ripped from their mother's womb or torn limb from limb in the name of choice. We have gone back. We've ignored that. A few years ago, I was speaking in Scotland. I speak at a youth conference there every year. And the year it was in Edinburgh, my best friend Jeremy and I went to this conference, and we decided, since once we're in Europe, it's really cheap to get around Europe once you're already over there. We took a few extra days to go travel, and we decided on that trip we were going to go to Auschwitz. And so we flew to Krakow, Poland after this conference. And we got up the next morning, and we got on a bus, and we took a bus from Krakow, Poland to Auschwitz. Has anybody here been to Auschwitz or another concentration camp? A couple people have. When you get to Auschwitz, there is a wrought iron gate. And above this gate is a wrought iron arch sign that in German says the words, "Work makes free." See, the Nazis, when they were killing the Jews, when they were taking the Jews to the concentration camp, they were lying to them and telling them, if you go peacefully, if you go and you work really hard, you're going to get your freedom back. You're going to get your possessions back, your family back. You're going to get everything back. Kind of like that joke when you play a country record backwards. Get your wife back, your truck back, your dog back. If you go work there, you're going to get everything back. So as they walked into the concentration camp, as I walked in there, I noticed this sign, and I was just thinking about the mind games that the Nazis were playing with the Jews. And we got in there, and we went into a few buildings, and there's a lot of things to see that'll just tear you up. I mean, you see the ovens, you see the firing panel, the wood wall with the bullet holes in it. But there was one building in particular that had 3 displays in it that really got to me that day. And the first display was a giant pile of hair. And as you're looking at this hair, you look behind you and you see a jacket and a blanket in a case. And you look very closely at this jacket and this blanket, and as you look at the edges of it, you realize that this jacket and this blanket were woven out of human hair. The Nazis would literally shave the hair off the Jews and make blankets and jackets to keep themselves warm. And then you walk into the next room, and there's a pile of prosthetic legs and arms. And as I'm looking at these prosthetics, I'm thinking to myself, these are pieces of people. These are literally pieces of people. But the next display in the next room, nothing in the world could have prepared me for. So vivid in my memory. There's a glass case full of baby clothes. And as I'm looking in this glass case full of baby clothes, there was a little hand-knit pair of wool shorts. Now, I have 6 children now, but back then I had 5, and my youngest was my little boy Atticus. And Atticus, like our other kids, has been not used paper diapers, but cloth diapers. And when you use cloth diapers at night, over their diaper, you put on a little pair of hand-knit wool shorts. So I'm looking at these little shorts thinking, oh my gosh, they look just like the ones I put on my little Atticus every night. And I realized that these ones that I was looking at were taken off a little child, probably just like Atticus. And once they were taken off that child was thrown into an incinerator. And I walked out of that building, and my friend and I just looked at each other. We couldn't say a word. We're just blown away. And then we got on a bus. And that bus took us to the next concentration camp called Birkenau, right near Auschwitz. And I noticed the train tracks leading right through the front gate. And as we walked down the train tracks, they first took us to the right to a few of the barracks that were still standing. And you're looking inside this barracks, and there's this long cement bench from like this wall to that wall with holes in it. This was the toilet. Now, there's no curtains, there's no stalls, there's nothing to separate men and women. You're only allowed to use the toilets once in the morning and once at night. That's it. And so the most sought after job for people living in those barracks, the prisoners, the job that people wanted the most and would fight for, was the person who stayed behind and crawled into those toilets and with their bare hands cleaned out all the human excrement. Can you imagine living your life where that's the job that would be the best job you can have? You see, that meant you got to use the bathroom more than twice a day, and that meant you got to work inside and not outside in the cold weather in just flimsy clothes. And then they took us down the train tracks, and we got to this platform of rocks, and this is where they would unload the trains. And so you're standing here, and you can imagine the Jews are standing in the trains like this, holding the possessions that they have. And they're standing tight in that train for 8 days, 9 days. No, there's nowhere to sit down. There's nowhere to lay down. There's no bathrooms. You just go into the bathroom in your pants. They're not given food or water. So if you didn't have food or water in your possessions, a lot of people were dying. So you're standing there with dead bodies leaning up against you. And they finally unload you onto this platform of rocks. And that's when the Germans start to separate people. And they look at this crowd over here, and they look at you guys right here, and they think, you guys are really healthy looking, so we're going to get you a job. And they send you over here. They start separating you off. You guys are going to get a job over here. But over here, you guys are a little older. You know, some of you look like you're a little more tired. You know what? We're going to get you a nice hot shower and some clean clothes first. So they'd separate the grandmas and the grandpas and younger people and anybody maybe that had glasses or that didn't look like they were as healthy and could work as hard, and told you that you're going to go get a nice hot shower and clean clothes. So they'd send you off to your barracks, and then we would walk in the same path that this group walked. And we'd come to a building. And I'm standing outside this building, and they start describing what happened next. And that's when they took you guys in, and they told you to take off all your clothes. Once again, there's no privacy. Doesn't matter who's around you. And they told you to put them on a number so you can remember that number so you can get your clean clothes after your nice hot shower. Now remember, you've just been standing in a train going to the bathroom on yourself and dead bodies leaning against you. You didn't care about anything but that hot shower. And they'd take you into the shower room and they'd close the door behind you and you'd look up waiting for that water. And then all of a sudden 2 holes would open in the ceiling and canisters would drop from the ceiling. And within 20 minutes, you're all dead from gas. All of you. And then they would bring you out of your barracks. You'd go and get your clothes, and they'd say, it's time to work. And they would walk you to the back door of that building. And you'd walk in that back door, and there's your grandmother laying there on the ground dead. And they tell you, pick her body up and put it in an incinerator, and if you even hesitate, they just shoot you in the head. And there's your little girl, your little daughter, lying there on the floor. They tell you to pick her body up. And if you don't do it, they kill you. And I'm sitting there staring at this building thinking to myself, how did this happen? How did this happen in our world? How did we allow this monstrosity? How? This was just 70 years ago. How in the world was this allowed to happen? And I looked off in the distance and I saw a house outside of a fence. And I'm staring at this house and I start to imagine to myself, what if I lived there back in those days? What if I was a Christian man with 6 kids living in that house when this camp started to operate? What if that was my house? What would I have done? I get up some Saturday morning and I walk out my back door with a cup of coffee. My children are playing soccer in the backyard. And I look over and I see the Jews being put into that building. And I see that big smokestack light up. And all of a sudden my backyard starts to fill with human ash. What would I have done? Would I have been willing to stand up? If one of those Jews escaped and got past that fence, would I have been willing to hide them in my basement? Would I have been active in trying to rescue some of them? Or would I have said, kids, let's get in the house real quick. Let's close the curtains and close the door so nobody sees this. And as I was asking myself that question, I looked back at that house and I saw my own house. And God spoke to me and said, Bryan, that is your house. The house is your house. It's your house. I realize that every one of us in this room lives in that house. We don't have to wonder what would we have done 70 years ago, because every single day in our backyard there are buildings where almost 4,000 innocent human beings are taken in there, and they're coming out in trash cans and medical waste containers. We don't have to ask ourselves, what would we do? We have to ask ourselves, what are we doing today? What are we doing today? Because we do live in that house. That is our backyard. Some of you might ask, well, wait a minute, Bryan, come on. There's a little bit of a difference between the Jews that are killed in a concentration camp and fetuses. There's some kind of a difference, isn't there? Yeah, there's 2 differences, actually. 2 simple differences. The first difference is their age. Their age. They're simply in a different stage of development as a human being. That's it. They're simply a different stage. See, the children in the womb, the fetus, is not anything but a human being. It can't suddenly, after a little bit of development, become an ostrich. It's a human being. Zygote, embryo, fetus, infant, toddler, teenager, adult, senior citizen, all stages of the life of a human being. That development ends the day you die. Did you know that you develop until the day you die? You ever notice like your great-grandparents or grandparents that have the big old honking ears and nose with the hair growing out of it? Your ears and your nose, young ladies, it's something to look forward to. Your ears and your nose grow until the day you die. So the longer you live, the bigger they get. Your cells develop. You develop until the day you die. When does that start? Does that start when you're a teenager? Well, for boys, development starts then. But you can trace that backwards to a precise point when that sperm and that egg unite. 23X and 23Y chromosome come together to form a unique human person. Whether you're going to have blonde hair or dark hair, blue eyes or green eyes, whether you're going to be a boy or a girl, all of that is decided at that very moment that sperm and that egg meet and you start developing and you go through the stages of life until the day you die. So the differences are there. There's one difference, age, simply age. But the second difference, that's the important difference. That's the reason you're here today. That's the reason this conference is being held. It's the reason I flew from Ohio yesterday. That second difference. Do you guys remember Hurricane Katrina? Do you remember watching the news after Hurricane Katrina? The thing that was probably stood out the most was the first few days when those news helicopters were flying over New Orleans and you saw people standing on their roof, help me, help me, or around the Superdome or in the rivers, crying out for help. That's the difference. The babies, they can't cry out. They don't have a voice. They need a voice. That's the second difference. They need a voice. That's why we're here today. Because they need you to stand up and be a voice for them. You know the truth. You know what's happening. You know that 4,000 people are dying every single day. If I were to stand up in any of your churches on any Sunday and run up to the pastor and whisper in his ear, and the pastor goes, wait a minute, hey, everybody, listen, a man with a knife is about to walk into the daycare, the nursery, and kill all the 3-year-olds. If you're sitting in your church and your pastor said that, how many of you, show me your hands, would run to that daycare as fast as you can? Yeah. But if your pastor said, hey, everybody, as soon as we get out of church, about a half hour after we get out of church, the Planned Parenthood's going to open. And they're going to do 20 abortions. Most of us would say, oh, that's too bad, and then go to Denny's or Bob Evans or somewhere to have something to eat. We haven't really seen it for what it truly is. We haven't really seen the child in the womb as the same thing. Now, some of you are going, well, wait a minute, Bryan. You know, that's good and everything. Of course, you're going to go because that's what you're called to do. You're called to be pro-life. Obviously, I'm called to something else in my life. I have a different calling in my life. Well, I believe that all of us are called to love our neighbors as ourselves. All of us are called to love our neighbors as ourselves. But we haven't really been able to understand who our neighbor is. Our neighbor is not just the guy that lives next door that won't return your hammer. Our neighbor is our fellow human person, and God gave us such a beautiful parable to describe who our neighbor is and what it means to love our neighbors. Can I get you to volunteer for me? All right, I need you to lay down right here in that ditch. Okay, there's a ditch right there. Lay down because you just got beaten up bad. So here's our friend Billy here. He's been beaten up. He's lying in a ditch. He's blood. You know this story, right? You better, otherwise you haven't been paying attention in Sunday school. Okay, so Billy's lying in the ditch, and I'll speak really loud because I have to walk away from the microphone here for the camera here. I'm sorry. But Billy's laying in the ditch, and all of a sudden a priest walks up, right? Priest walks up. He's like, But wait a minute. Priest is called to something. I'm called to something else. So the priest goes this way. And so next is the Levite. And he walks up and he sees Billy. But he's called to something else. So he goes this way. Well, here comes the Good Samaritan. Good Samaritan walks up. He sees it. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, okay? But I don't remember any version of the Bible, any denomination, anywhere, any version of this story where the Good Samaritan first stops and prays and says, God, am I called to a ditch ministry? No. The Good Samaritan sees his fellow human person lying in a ditch. He walks over and he loves his neighbor as himself. Go ahead and have a seat. Yeah. Thank you, brother. Our neighbor is our fellow human person, and when our fellow human person is being killed almost 4,000 times a day, we are all called to stand up. We are all called to be a voice and to do something more for these children. Yes, there's going to be a price. You see, I told that story about living in that house, and if I did live in that house outside that concentration camp, I'd probably lose my life for standing up. That's not what we're asking you to do. But there will be a price. Your friends might think you're lame. Your friends might think you're lame. Who cares? Standing up for God is not always the most popular thing in the world. But who would you rather have approval of, God or your friends? In the end, I think I'd rather have approval of God. You know? What's more important, whether your friends think you're cool or whether you're standing up against the killing of innocent babies? You know? We know the truth, and we should be sharing that truth. Think about this. You know, what's the big convenience store in Oregon? Is it 7-Eleven? Or what? Freddy's? Okay, everyone knows Freddy's, right? You guys are 7-Eleven? Okay, any of those stores. Let's say you're going there, right? You go in there tomorrow, and you walk in and you say, hey, do you have bananas? And the cashier goes, you said the magic word. Anybody who walks in the store today and says the word bananas gets $500 cash. And he hands you $500. What's the first thing you're going to do? Well, you only get to do it once. You're going to tell everybody. You're going to be on your phone. You're going to be texting. You're going to be Facebooking, Twittering, tweeting, everything. Go to Freddy's. Say bananas. You get $500. How much more important is the truth of Jesus Christ and the message of life than $500? How much more important? But unfortunately, people, the church, for some reason, even the church has not completely seen the truth. They have not really seen a baby in the womb that dies is the same thing. I actually learned that the hard way recently. I recently just converted to Catholicism. Before that, I went to an Orthodox Presbyterian church. And on February 23rd, I woke up to my wife screaming. And as I ran into the bathroom where my wife was, she stood up, and there was my 12-week-old son floating in a toilet. And my wife started bleeding very bad. And I had to pick his body out of the toilet. And I had to rush my wife to the emergency room. She lost over 2 pints of blood. The doctor was able to stop the bleeding. She stayed there overnight as they checked on her. And we lost our little boy, Benjamin Davis. And as I started to make the funeral arrangements, bought a coffin for him, got a plot at the local cemetery, and then put out the invitations to my church family and friends and family that we were going to have a funeral for my son, Benjamin Davis, who died. My pastor and one other family from my church showed up. Most of my friends didn't bother to take a day off. And there was just a few people at my son's funeral. And I thought to myself, if that had been any of my other 6 children that run around that church building all the time, everybody in that church would have been there. All of my family and friends would have been there. But for some reason, people didn't see Benjamin Davis as just as valuable as Kimberly or Abigail or Madeline or Jameson or Atticus or Emmerich, any of my other children. But I know that Benjamin is just as precious as any of my other children. We have to understand that those children that are dying in the womb are just as valuable, and we have to get this message out, people. 53 million surgical abortions. 53 million. That's what we've had since January 22nd of 1973. I'm 43 years old. 43 years old. And my generation has failed you. For the young people in this room, my generation has failed you. We have handed you a legacy of 38 years. 38 years of child killing. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry it took me so long to stand up. But you cannot pass this on to the next generation. You cannot fail the next generation. My little girl, Abigail, she's 10 now. This girl is so in love with Jesus, so in tune with God. And I remember when she was like 3 and a medevac helicopter landed in our neighborhood, and I went to talk about it. She's like, Daddy, first you stop and you pray. You know? And a little while after that, I think she was 4 years old or 5, and I was getting ready to go to work. Little Abigail looks up at me and says, Daddy, can I go to work with you today? And I looked at her and I said, honey, I need you to stay home and help take care of Mommy. And little Abigail looks up at me and she says, Daddy, I want to go to work and save babies. My little girl knows what's going on. And it breaks my heart because I don't want her to follow in my footsteps. People, young people in this room, listen to me. You cannot allow in 25 years for your children to be sitting in this room listening to my little Abigail tell them the same thing. You cannot allow that to happen. You cannot pass this down and fail the next generation. It's got to stop now. It's got to stop now. We must stand up. We must be a voice. And if you think that it's too far gone, that our country is too far gone, I get older people asking me all the time, sorry to pick on the older people. I'm one of you. But the older the person gets, say, Bryan, do you think we really can win this battle? Do you really think it's 2011. Things are so bad. You know, it's almost like they thought that when Barack Obama was elected that God was hiding under a corner, under a table. Do you really think that? Well, my question is a simple question to answer that. How big is your God? How big is your God? Because I know that my God is bigger than abortion. My God is bigger than Barack Obama. And through God, through Christ, we can win this battle, and we will win this battle. And when this generation realizes, as soon as people start telling you, young people, if you are told that you are the leaders of the future, say, no way. You are the leaders of today. This is your generation that's dying. These are your brothers and sisters who are being killed. And it's time that you stood up and say, no more child killing in my country. No more child killing in my country. I've got like 2 minutes left, so I'm gonna promote a couple of things real quick. Thank you guys for having me here. I'm going to speak again at 3, but I want to promote a couple of things. One of the things that the events that my organization is called Stand True. Our website is being rebuilt right now, so if you go to bryankemper.com, Bryan with a Y, that's my daily blog, and that's where I do most of my ministry stuff through right now. We have an event called the Pro-Life Day of Silent Solidarity that happens every year in October, where students take a vow of silence for a day in school. Last year, we had students at over 4,000 campuses in 28 countries, and 54 high school students canceled abortions in one day because of that event. It's a great event. The website for that is silentday.org. I have a book I've written called Social Justice Begins in the Womb, where I help you to understand all the pro-life arguments, all the tough questions, lots of different situations, some of my thoughts on God and stuff. So this book is available out there. But another website that I'm working with that I think is a great and powerful thing, especially as I come back to the Catholic Church learning about Lent and sacrifice and giving things up. My friend Jason Jones and I started a new website that just started a few weeks ago called untilabortionends.com, untilabortionends.com, where we're asking people, young and old, are you willing to give up something you love until the day abortion is outlawed in America? My daughter, my Abigail, gave up Oreos. She is committed to never eat another Oreo until the day they outlaw abortion. I gave up French fries, one of my favorite things. I will never eat another French fry. And what the thing is you pick something that you love, and every opportunity, every time I go to a restaurant when I have to order a value meal but not get the fries, it reminds me to say an extra prayer, to spend a few minutes in prayer. It reminds me to sacrifice. I was just in Belgium, who invented the fries. They're not really French fries, they're Belgian fries. They have fries with everything in Belgium. In fact, the pro-life dinner, the main dinner, it was fries. So I had to sacrifice. and not eat fries. But it's that extra time, that extra effort to pray and to give something up and to offer that. So I encourage you to go to Until Abortion Ends, pick something to give up, make a video. We'll put it on the website. And imagine if tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people are sacrificing and spending that time in prayer, what we can do. But again, I'll speak again at 3. I'm going to talk about lots more ideas and projects to do. Thank you so much for having me. I'd love you to come by my booth, get a book or do something, but get involved with Oregon Right to Life. Let them know how amazing it is that they are providing this voice, this opportunity for young people to get up and stand up and be a voice. Thank you.